Hello there, my name is Quentin Russell. I am the engagement specialist here at Doc365, and today I'm going to be talking to you about common Office 365 adoption challenges and how your organization can overcome them. Now, as part of this webinar, here's what we're going to talk about today. So at first, we're going to talk about who we are as a company, who is Doc365, what do we do, establish our credibility. From there, we'll launch into the actual webinar itself. So we'll talk about common Office 365 adoption challenges. We'll talk about why they come up, and then we'll talk about how you can overcome them. And then at the end of the webinar, we will be doing a question and answer session where you'll be able to ask questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if people have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type them out in the chat. I will respond to those at the end of the webinar. That way we don't have to break the flow of everything, and I will go through those chronologically. If there's anything I can't answer, I will do the research, find the answer to your question, and send that over as part of the recording that we'll be sending out later today. With that said, let's jump into the webinar. So first of all, who are we? So we're Doc365. We're a company located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have over 18 years of experience working with Microsoft solutions to deliver an exceptional range of productivity systems and tools. So we work with a wide range of companies in a variety of industries to implement a diverse array of SharePoint productivity tools. So these include intranet portals, contract management systems, CRM solutions, and more. If you're interested in taking a look at any of those, doing a quick demo, feel free to head over to our website, mydoc365.com. Click free demo in the upper right corner, choose the product that you want to take a look at, and we'll schedule a free 30 to 45-minute demo. We'll explore the system, see how it can address your needs, and go from there. Let's see, okay. So let's talk about the common Office 365 adoption problems. So the first one is a lack of use. The second one is the time investment that comes with building out Office 365, any broken processes that come during adoption, and then a limited Office 365 infrastructure. So kind of taking a look at those with a lack of use. So one of the biggest adoption challenges is people just not adopting the system. They're still using their previous work tools and methods instead of switching over to your current existing Office 365 environment. There might be a lot of reasons why they don't use it. You know, fear, lack of understanding, apathy, but essentially if they're not made to do it, they won't make the switch. And at the end of the day, people not using Office 365 after you've purchased it is a major waste of time and can lead to all sorts of other issues for your organization. Not only is it a waste of time, it's a waste of money. You've made this investment into Office 365 because it can benefit your business and help you with a variety of different things, but people aren't using it. So you're essentially paying for something that no one's going to use. You come to the end of the year, people haven't used it. You look back and you say, well, we just wasted however much we spent on this. It did nothing for our organization. It did cause nothing but confusion. And yeah, so we're not going to use it. And because of that, and in a situation like that, you're going to be losing out on a great platform that offers you a wide array of tools to really get involved and get users engaged. And if you're not really using those, they're not going to use the system. And so that is definitely one of the biggest adoption issues that come up during this process. Moving on to the next one is the time investment involved in setting up Office 365. It takes a lot of time to build out anything worthwhile in Office 365. I mean, anyone responsible for setting up an Office 365 environment built out for like a workspace and everything is going to be planning out site navigation, setting up the actual sites themselves, configuring permissions, building out workflows, all of which just take time. Even not building out a simple approval workflow, say for instance, building out something for someone's, like let's say you're trying to sort of build a workflow for vacation requests. Building out something like that and then testing it, making sure that everything works, configuring everything properly can take anywhere from, an hour to 3 hours, depending on your level of understanding of SharePoint, your technical expertise, your familiarity with coding and workflows. And that's just one small facet. And the larger your organization gets, the more and more time it's going to take to really get into Office 365, get people set up, get them ready to go. And the longer that takes, the longer it takes to roll out and deploy, the less and less people are going to be interested in actually getting involved and using Office 365. And it can just have a major negative impact on overall user adoption. Another major adoption challenge is broken processes. It's kind of an inevitable thing that at some point in time, a process is going to break during the Office 365 transition. People get confused about where things go. They don't know how things are supposed to function. They don't know what's supposed to happen. They run into situations where they don't understand file sharing and securities. They accidentally create multiple copies of something. They build out whole new sites that they don't need, or, going back to the lack of adoption, they just don't use it, continue to use the old file share. So you have people working on two separate sets of platforms and everything. And so the people who are working over here don't know what's going on over here, and you end up with a situation where the left hand has no idea what the right is doing. And so this causes confusion, and it's going to cause situations where even if it's because users aren't adopting the system that the process broke, they're still going to point to the process breaking and say, well, this is why we shouldn't use Office 365. If we hadn't made the switch to Office 365, this wouldn't have broke, and we'd still be fine. Even though it's technically their fault, even though the process was not broken as a result of Office 365, that's still a situation where people will point to that and they will say, no, this is why it's broken. It's obviously because of Office 365, we can't do it. And that's just going to cause a major issue for adoption, because that kind of attitude spreads throughout the organization and causes major issues. And so again, it just goes back to the point where people just aren't using it and you're wasting a ton of money. And then the last one, the last major challenge, is basically having a limited Office 365 infrastructure. Office 365 is complex. I've spent the better part of a year immersed in it, learning how things work, work and function, and I have barely scratched the surface. And the thing is that I guarantee you, with that year, I still understand more than 80% of people using Office 365. And even then, there's still so much to learn. When most companies deploy Office 365, they're only using it as a glorified file share service. They don't know how to configure workflows. They don't know how to set up metadata. They don't know how to configure their hub sites. They don't know how to configure their term store. Managing permissions is a nightmare because everything is super custom, and they don't understand how putting things into groups and assigning that out to people. They just don't understand some of the higher level Office 365 stuff that makes it easy to use. One of the things I like to say is that Office 365 has a very high ceiling and a very high floor, which is to say, it does really well to start with. Well, no. So basically, it's like it's really easy to get to the first floor of Office 365, learning how to use the basic stuff like file sharing, sharing things with other people, email, all that stuff. And then there's like 10 flights of stairs that lead up to the next level, which is actually using it the way that Microsoft 365 kind of envisions most users using it. And it takes time and it takes a lot of effort to get to that point. And even then, once you're at that point, you've basically got a skyscraper above you of functions that can take forever to learn and deploy for your organization. And a lot of users feel that, like they understand that on some instinctual level. And so they just don't want to approach it because they feel it's too complicated. They don't understand that getting in the door is pretty easy. They don't understand that getting up to a certain point, while it does require a certain amount of training, means that they're going to be able to do the majority of what they should be doing. But they see that higher level, they see all that stuff up there, and it's kind of scares them. And so they don't want to use it. And so if you, and they can definitely tell if your company is not using the Office 365 environment to its full potential. because there's going to be a lot of stuff gated off, a lot of stuff that they're going to be able to see because you're not going to, because your IT team, whoever's responsible for setting up the Office 365 environment, isn't going to know enough to hide that from them. So they'll be able to see all of that other stuff, and basically they'll get to the point where they'll poke around in there and be just smart enough and just knowledgeable enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually make any positive change for your organization. So that limited infrastructure, that limited understanding is definitely one of the biggest adoption challenges, because it's just so daunting to try to get into. But kind of going into why, the kind of psychology and understanding why these different adoption challenges come up. And there's 4 major issues why adoption challenges arise when it comes to, making the switch to Office 365. The first one is confusion and apathy, like people not wanting to use it for a variety of different reasons. The next one is just a lack of technical expertise, people not understanding what to do in there. After that, we'll talk. After that, another big one is a lack of training. This is less on the user side of things and more on the management side, and ensuring that people actually understand why they're doing things and what to do. And then from there, the last big one is a lack of accountability. That speaks for itself. People not using the system and not being made to. But kind of going in depth into confusion and apathy. I don't know about you, but on a day-to-day basis, I prefer some level of routine. And I know most users do as well. Maybe not in the work that they do, but in the systems and processes that they use to do it. If you have the same way that you've been doing something for months or even years, and then someone pulls the rug out from under you and makes the switch, you're probably not going to want to make that change. Because you have a routine, you know what works, and you're going to be worried that you don't know how to use this new system, that you're not going to be able to use it as well as the other. Or you might run into a situation where you just don't want to. You don't understand why the change is being made. You don't know why you're being forced to make this switch. And so you just don't want to. And so you don't. Because you are, maybe not you in particular. It's kind of a royal you. And this is something that especially applies to many older workers who are just kind of resistant to adopting new technologies, not just Office 365, but just technology in general. They have a way that they've been doing it for a while, and it works for them. They do a great job. That's not to say that they are bad workers because they are resistant to adopting this new technology, but they have something that works for them. And this is not just talking about older workers in general. This is just talking about the adoption resistant workers. But essentially, if they don't know that they can trust the system, if they don't care to trust the system, they're not going to do it. They won't have the buy-in necessary to make that transition smoother. Like, people have to want to use the system. You have to explain it to them. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to do what they're doing. And then that leads to a situation of broken processes, a lack of adoption. You're wasting money. Errors are popping up. And like I was saying earlier, those errors pop up in the process and everything's broken. The users who are resistant to making that change are going to point to those issues. They're going to point to those mistakes and those breaks in the process and say, this is why. We can't make the switch because of this. This is the reason. And so it's just going to, again, spread out through your organization and create this kind of attitude towards the system of apathy and resentment and people not wanting to use it. But moving on to the next point, which is a lack of technical expertise. Not everyone is good at technology. This isn't older worker, younger worker thing either. This is there's just a solidly sized portion of the population who just doesn't quite get it. And that's not any knock against them. That's not anything disparaging about their intelligence. That's just not where their talents lie. It's not something that they really care to do because they have other parts of their job that they're doing. I mean, for instance, a lot of lawyers don't exactly need to know how to use the higher levels of Office 365. They just need to know how to use it to draft contracts, store everything in there. The average user doesn't need to understand a lot to do their job. But the problem is that if they don't understand it, well, they're not going to want to use it, especially if they have a process that already works for them. And it can take them time and effort to really get into it, something that might scare them off. Or if it's just on that time aspect, I mean, it's going to be 3 to 6 months before they're getting up to speed. And so you have a 3 to 6 month dip in productivity during that process, during that transition. And so you just run into a situation where you have half the users who are basically taking to Office 365 like a fish to water, and you have the other half who are drowning up on land because they feel like a fish out of water. And so that's going to cause broken processes. That's going to cause people to not want to actually make the switch to the system, or they'll use a kind of bastardized version of the system where they don't go according to all of the processes and systems that you've set up during that deployment process, and they just kind of do their own thing in the system. And that circles us back around to broken processes and lack of full adoption, which is definitely a major issue. I don't know if I've emphasized that enough. But going on to the next point, it's a lack of, there's also a lack of training. That's one of the biggest issues. A lot of companies will adopt Office 365. They'll purchase it for themselves. They'll set up the user licenses, get everyone an email, and then they'll just kind of drop them in the system and say, okay, learn to fly. And the problem is that Office 365 is not one of those things where you can push the baby bird out of the nest and they start flying. It's one of those things where you have to train people. You have to walk them through the process. They have to see how it works so that they can learn to do it. Providing maybe like a single intro session where it's like 30 minutes and it's just, hey, here's what we're doing. Do this, do that, do this. It's not going to work. Training is going to take time. It's going to take a couple weeks to get everyone acclimated, with regular training sessions that show people how it works, and not just like someone going up to the top of a classroom or like a classroom quote unquote environment and droning on about how it works. No, it needs to be like, our recommendation is actually like small groups where you have like 5 or 6 people who can ask questions of the person. And then that way they can get more engaged and feel more connected to it. But we'll kind of talk about that in a bit. I'll go more in depth on what I mean by that. But yeah, so basically this is more of a failing on management side, is they're not providing the training necessary to get people involved. And so they just won't, especially if they are feeling that confusion, if they're feeling that apathy, if they don't understand it. Well, they're never going to understand it because they're not going to go out of the, I mean, most users aren't going to go out of their way to read all of the Microsoft help blogs to figure out how to do something. They're just going to try to poke around. They might ask a few questions. If they don't get a satisfactory answer, they'll just find a workaround, or they just won't do it. Which, that's kind of the worst option right there, is them not using it. But essentially, if management is not providing the training, if they're not providing a space for people to learn and get acclimated to the system, they're just not going to use it. The last big reason and the last big cause for a lot of adoption challenges is a lack of accountability. This is also something that falls on management, but it also kind of falls on other users. If people aren't using it, they need to be held accountable. Give them a warning, give them a write-up, put them on probation if they just continue to not use it. But whatever it is, they need to be held to task. If management is lax about making sure users are actually using Office 365, they won't, especially if they are resistant to doing it, if they don't want to get into it. And so you just run into, again, that situation where it's just everything's broken and you're wasting money because users aren't actually being made to use it. And that's one of the biggest issues we come up with. Like one of the clients that we work with, we provided them a contract management system on their Office 365 environment. And what happened is that they were already using Office 365 as a kind of file sharing environment. But they weren't really using it for much else. And so the client came to us and said, hey, we would like you to build out a contract management system on our SharePoint. We said, okay, here, we took a look at their processes, consulted with their team. 4 weeks later, we deployed it to their system. Cut to a year later, the people who were using the system loved it. It was great, amazing. The people who weren't were confused because they did not attend the trainings. Management did not enforce adoption. There was confusion between the VP of sales and the CIO over what should happen. The CIO was not actually enforcing the use of the new system. And so people were just kind of going back and forth. Some people were still using the file share for the contracts, and some people were using the contract management system. So they were running into compliance issues. They were running into situations where people were half adopting it. And, you know, there was a difficulty reconciling all of the contracts in the system. So then after, you know, some internal reorganization, something happened. They got everyone onto using the contract management system, everyone using it full time and fully adopting it and holding them accountable for using it. And suddenly everything's, you know, cut to now, everything's smoothed out. There are no broken processes and everything's working. And while this is a example for our contract management system, which is built on SharePoint, it's still a good example of how accountability can definitely help with a contract management, not with a contract management system, but with overcoming adoption issues in your organization, which we're coming up to on the last point, which is how do you actually overcome these common Office 365 adoption challenges? Well, there's 4 major ways you can do so. The first is you can provide training. The second is building buy-in. The third is accountability. And then the fourth is using a managed service for your Office 365 environment. So we'll kind of talk about that one a little bit at the end, kind of going a bit more in a different direction. But basically, with the first one, providing training. Make sure to provide a fair amount of training for users, especially if you, well, I should say, the training you provide your users should be contingent on their overall level of technical expertise, which is to say, if you know your users are good at technology, especially if you're like a software startup or something, but it's people who are go-getters who will learn the system, adopt it, be good at using it, all of that fun stuff, you don't need as much training. Because you can know that they're just going to get into the system and get going. But if you know your workforce, you know how they adopt technology, you've seen it in the past, and you kind of understand what's, you know, that potentially they're not going to want to make this switch. Well, first of all, reconsider making the switch, because honestly, if your whole workforce is resistant to making the change over to Office 365 and you unilaterally make that decision, you are not going to, you know, you're not going to create any sort of love towards the platform itself. And in fact, you're going to generate a lot of resistance right there out of the gate. But if you are switching over to Office 365 and you know there's not going to be that extreme level of resistance, but there is going to be a level of confusion and technological illiteracy, I should say, then you should probably provide a fair amount of training. Go pretty in depth, walk them through it. We recommend, like I was saying earlier, we recommend like a 5-person classroom style, where they can launch off questions and have it be more interactive than just like doing a presentation or showing them a video. I also recommend, as counterintuitive as it might seem, not homework, but definitely give users, like as you're moving over and adopting it, give them like an hour or two each day, or maybe like a half hour each day, where they can just go into like a sandbox environment and mess around with it, play around with it and learn it for themselves. Maybe have them do different like assignments and everything so that they can have that practical hands-on experience and kind of do like dry runs, so that once you've finished deployment and setting everything up, you can just hit the ground running. Whatever it is, whatever training style you use, you should be providing a fair amount of it, especially in that first like 6-month period. That's crucial for whether or not Office 365 is actually going to take in your organization and people are going to use it. But even then, after that point, you should still provide consistent training. When you have new users coming in, you should have a built-out training course for them to go over so that they can learn the system and get as well acquainted with it as everyone else. It shouldn't just be a 6-month adoption and then you throw people at the system as you come in with new people. It should be a full, like each new person that comes into your organization should receive the same level of training as the people who were there when Office 365 was first adopted. The next thing you really need to do is you need to build buy-in. So you need to actually sell your users on Office 365. The same sales pitch that Microsoft used to get you to even purchase the platform in the first place, you should be using to sell it to your users. You should explain to them why you're using it, how much it's going to help them. You should specifically tailor your explanation of it to their work, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. That way, instead of running into a situation where you're saying, okay, we're going to switch to Office 365. It's easier. We're done. It's like, hey, we're going to switch over to Office 365 because the workflows will actually make it so that we can build out our different processes. And instead of having to walk through every step manually and run into situations where notifications get lost in someone's inbox, tasks don't get done because no one knows what they're doing, the workflows will actually just program everything in so that we can move from step to step to step without someone having to memorize the whole process and remember what they need to be doing, so that we can get rid of a lot of human error. We're switching over to this because we run into a situation where no one's able to reconcile the right version of the document that we're using. So we're switching over to Office 365 where everything is stored on the cloud so that we can make sure that we're all accessing the same files. That kind of stuff. You almost have to be a salesperson for your organization to get them to want to use it. This is especially the case for I will say with apathetic users, they might understand and not care. But with people who are potentially scared or confused about making the switch, potentially because they're worried it might not have a feature that they need, or they've built out a personal workflow for themselves that works with what they're doing currently, but they're worried it might not fly in the Office 365 setup, you should sell it to them in a way that says, hey, that reassures them and says, hey, look, you're still going to be able to do everything that you want to do. Everything's going to work the same. It's just going to be in Office 365. But basically just getting that buy-in, selling them on it can really help you with people wanting to actually learn to use it and adopt it, because they'll want to pay more attention during the trainings. They'll want to get involved and learn because they'll see the actual work benefit for themselves. The next thing you need to do to overcome a lot of the common challenges is just hold people accountable. It's as simple as saying, hey, we haven't been in the workplace in the last year. And some people aren't switching back, but for those who are, it's as simple as walking by someone's door or cubicle or whatever, seeing that they're not using Office 365 for file sharing. If it's very obvious, and saying, hey, what you doing there, buddy? And basically holding them accountable for it, giving them a warning, giving them a write-up if necessary. So if you've built out the process for something in Office 365 for how they're supposed to submit a certain document, and a user comes in and submits it a completely different way, potentially the old way, well, that's a situation where you reject it, send it back to them and say, no, you need to do it this way. And if they insist on not doing it that way, then you switch over to actually reprimanding them, because at that point in time, they're just willfully obstructing your business. And that doesn't fly. And it kind of, and it sucks. I will be the first to say that it sucks to have to get on people like that. No one wants to be the fun police. No one wants to be the cop that rains on everyone's parade. But at the end of the day, someone has to hold people accountable for using the system, because it can be a considerable investment for your organization. You're growing, you're evolving. You need to have people actually making the switch. And if they're not willing to make that switch, and if they're not willing to use what you've provided for them, and they're just going to continue to use the old ways, then maybe you need to reconsider whether or not they should be at your organization. It's not a an indictment of their work quality, but it's an indictment of the character of their work and the character of that person. And maybe it's a good litmus test for whether or not they should actually be at your organization. And eventually, as you kind of enforce adoption and you hold people accountable for using the system, it's going to spread, because no one's going to want to see their coworker get in trouble for not using the system. And sure, it might not engender them to the actual platform itself, and it might, set up a level of unhappiness. But if you've, in addition to holding people accountable, developed a, you've cultivated that buy-in and you've trained people on how to use the system, you get a situation where everyone is wanting to use the platform, because that's the thing. What I've talked about so far and how to overcome these challenges, they work together as like a triangle, or I'm trying to do a triangle like that. But basically each one is a side of the triangle, and you can't have too much of each. If you have too much training but no buy-in, people aren't going to pay attention. If you have all accountability, no buy-in, people are going to hate the system. If you have a ton of buy-in, no training, well, no one's going to actually, people are going to want to use the system. They're going to learn, but they're going to learn varying amounts, and no one's actually going to know how to use the system. If you have no training and all accountability, you run into a situation where people are confused and feeling resentful of management because, hey, you want us to do this thing, but we don't know how, and you never explained it to us. If you have all buy-in but no accountability, well, that can kind of function. But if you have all buy-in, if you have all like accountability, no training, kind of going back to that point, yeah, all training, no accountability, well, people are going to know how to use the system, but they're not going to use the system. And if they have all buy-in but no accountability, well, we kind of already covered that. But essentially, yeah, like I was kind of rambling about, you need to do all three in order for everything to work. And one of the last ways, and this is kind of a pivot away from like organizational things and more to like an actual tool/platform you can use, but basically, you're not going to master Office 365 overnight. That's the truth. If you want to get the most out of your investment, the best thing that you can do is use a managed service. So find a company that's going to build out different Office 365 platforms on your Office 365 environment. So for instance, like if you're a company that does a lot of work with the different contracts and other things in your organization, look to another company to build you out a contract management system on your SharePoint platform. If you need help organizing your documents and the document libraries aren't quite intuitive enough for people to use, look to someone else for building out a full-on for helping you build out the actual document management side of things. If you are unsure of how to set up the different navigation and everything, and how you want it done, but you're not sure how to do it and have the time, going to another company that can help you build all of that out can definitely help with that. Because there is so much that you can do with Office 365. I mean, for instance, looking right here, we've built out a full contract management system on Office 365. So we've automated the actual contract generation process so that as opposed to having to copy and paste everything over and, filling everything out within a Word document, we set it up so that you can build a contract template, use a form to, populate different fields into a specific contract template. You build out a form essentially that takes that information and auto-populates it into a contract based on those different fields. You run into a situation where you can actually use Office 365 to take the contract generation process and take it from a 10, 20 minute, maybe even like a several hour long thing to, hey, I'm going to fill out these forms, gather this information, plug it into a contract, and bam, there we go, we have a contract. And that's something that requires a combination of workflows, Microsoft Forms, and managed metadata. That's something that, you first starting out with Office 365 are not going to be able to build for yourself. You want to manage your different, you want to set up like a full-on homepage for people to jump to. You know, building out something like this is going to take time, and there's going to be web parts and different modules that you're going to want to add that you just can't add starting out. Like this right here, this kind of banner right here that displays information to people, that is a fully custom web part. You know, you're not going to understand the same level of Active Directory. So how to plug into that and pull information from that. So like right here, we built this whole module out to pull directly from Active Directory to update people on the different important dates in someone's employment, or so like when they're hired, when their birthday is, when their work anniversary is, that sort of thing. You know, you're not going to have the same level of know-how to take your Azure AD and turn that into a full-on employee directory, complete with like the different the different nodes here that separate out the people's information by their name, phone number, department, and then you're not going to know how to set it up so that you can filter that information out as well. And I'm not saying that as like a knock against anyone's understanding of SharePoint. It's difficult. It takes time. And that is one of the biggest problems with adoption is you don't know what you don't know with SharePoint. And so building out the features that are going to best help your users, and it's going to take time. It's going to take you at least, I mean, if you're doing it yourself, it'll take anywhere from 6 months to a year to build out, and it's going to end up costing you somewhere in the realm of $50,000, $60,000, especially because you're having to hire a SharePoint expert, have them maintain the system. Meanwhile, you go with a managed services provider, and you're maybe paying $15,000 for the first year and then sub $10,000 after that. So, you know, what is actually really helping you get the most out of your SharePoint environment, and what's really helping you get the most out of your SharePoint investment. But yeah, so that is pretty much everything for the day. I want to know if anyone has any questions. Feel free to type them out in the chat, whether that's about the actual presentation itself or the kind of modules that I showed you a bit. If you have any questions about those, or you'd like to take a more in-depth look at any of those systems, which I showed you our contract management system first and then our intranet portal, feel free to sign up for a demo on our website, mydoc365.com. On the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a button that says free demo. Click that, fill that out, sign up for a free 30 to 45-minute demo. We'd love to take some time to sit down with you, go over the system, explore how it can benefit you, and go from there. As I kind of wait for questions to pop up in the chat, I do want to take a look at some of our upcoming webinars. We do a webinar each Tuesday at 11 a.m. EST. So next week we'll be doing what to look for in a contract management system. After that, we'll do the next part of our SharePoint Basics series. This time we'll talk about external sharing. On June 15th, we'll take a look at how to simplify the contract intake process. And then on June 22nd, we'll talk about how Office 365 solves contract lifecycle management. If there are no questions, I think we're done for the day. If you would like to reach out to us, you can always call us at 904-309-9970, or you can reach out at info@mydoc365.com. If you have any questions about what we talked about today, you can reach out to me at qrussell@mydoc365.com. If you enjoy our content and you'd like to show your support, you can always follow us on LinkedIn at Doc365. This has been Quentin Russell with Doc365, telling you how you can overcome common Office 365 adoption problems. Thank you very much and have a great day.